the slogan, Zionism is racism. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel are the new Nazis. They're the white supremacists. They're the colonizers. That language is not new. It was really crafted by the Soviets. I'll be completely frank with all your listeners. It was actually the Jewish studies that forced me out of academia. It was not my Russian colleagues in the Russian and Slavic department, but to the American Jews, I was labeling myself a right-wing politician, right? Because for them, the word Zionist was belonged within political discourse. I had no idea I was embarking on a political conversation. I want to see a decentralization of education. I do want education to be as decentralized as possible.
Welcome to Indoctrination, the podcast that exposes and opposes radical ideology in K-12 schools and academia. We examine the illiberal education loop that is teaching students what to think, not how to think. We speak with leaders across the country about the politicized ideology that fosters indoctrination masquerading as education. I'm Dr. Marcy Goldstein.
And I'm Dr. Brandy Shupatinsky, your hosts.
Join us and Americans nationwide. Welcome, Naya Lekht, Dr. Naya Lekht. We are so happy to have you today on Indoctrination. We're just going to jump right in and maybe get a little bit of your background in academia. What's your field of expertise? We're wondering what got you into academia and also, I know, out of academia.
Hi, great to be with you both. Before I talk about academia, I think it's really important for this conversation to say that I was born in the former Soviet Union, and I'm going to tie that in later as we get into the conversation about indoctrination and propaganda. Even though I grew up in America, I came in as a child. My parents lived in the Soviet Union, and so I was raised hearing of stories of what it was like to grow up effectively in a totalitarian regime. Obviously not during high Stalinism, but nevertheless, it was a totalitarian regime. When I was in college, I fell in love with literature. Always loved to write, loved to read, and I wanted to pursue a PhD. And I went to UCLA and I did a PhD in Russian literature. While I was both an undergrad and less so when I was a graduate student, I saw the proliferation of anti-Zionism on campus. So I'll date both myself and anti-Zionism in the United States of America. I think that if we talk about the beginning of anti-Zionism on college campuses, I would date it to the year when I was an undergrad in the year 2001. And this is because there are two events that kind of collided, and that were 9/11 and the Second Intifada. And I was an undergrad, and I was a student at UC Santa Cruz in the UC system in California. And I saw, it burst on the college scene. And I remember, I knew it was anti-Semitism, but it was called anti-Zionism. But I still knew that it was anti-Semitism. And the reason I knew is because, again, going back to my parents, the first, so to speak, victims of anti-Zionism are actually Russian-speaking Jews. They know it. They felt it. The Soviet Union launched an anti-Zionist campaign after the Six-Day War, after 1967. And the slogan, Zionism is racism. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel are the new Nazis. They're the white supremacists. They're the colonizers. That language is not new. It was really crafted by the Soviets. And I only knew this because of my own parents who taught it to me. So when I saw it on college campus, I couldn't not see it. I saw it and I knew it was anti-Semitism. Now, as I began to kind of fight anti-Semitism on college campuses as an undergrad. And then I pursued a PhD, right? I got into academia and I was interested in Russian literature, but my own field was in Holocaust literature in the Soviet Union. I was really interested in exploring how did Jewish and non-Jewish writers, how were they able to discuss the Holocaust in a regime, the Soviet regime, where you were not allowed to use words such as Holocaust, right? The Soviets never admitted and identified the primary victims of the Holocaust. And interestingly enough, as I was writing my dissertation, as I was in grad school, BDS came on the scene, which is the academic boycott, divestment, sanction movement. And this was around the year 2006, 2007. And I thought to myself, oh, it's getting much worse. Right? I remembered myself as an undergrad fighting anti-Semitism, that anti-Zionism, the slogans of Zionism is racism. And then I saw the institutionalization of that anti-Zionism through these social movements, these grassroots movements, these NGOs that were being formed, and it was getting increasingly difficult to stay in academia. Right? This is the reason I'm saying all of this is I think we incorrectly believe that October 7th is this day that showed us that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism has been on our campuses since the early 2000s. I saw it. I saw it unfold. I saw it surge. Um, and being in academia and being a Zionist, which I always identified as, because to me, Jew and Zionist is one and the same, was getting increasingly difficult. And before October 7th, I keep on wanting to stress that. And effectively, I'll be completely frank with all your listeners. It was actually the Jewish studies that forced me out of academia. It was not my Russian colleagues in the Russian and Slavic department. It was actually Jewish studies faculty that had a problem with my activism, my writings that I would do, um, my calling myself a Zionist. And, I left academia in the year 2018. And I went into Jewish nonprofit and I went into education, building curriculum. And I thought we must invest. We must go before college. We must invest in high school. I think now we have to even invest in elementary school. And we can't outsource this to, we could talk about this later. We shouldn't outsource this to any school. Parents have a huge responsibility in how they talk to their kids about what it means to be a Jew. So I went into academia loving Russian literature, wanting to pursue studying the Holocaust within the Soviet context. I could not turn my eye away, though, from the surge of anti Semitism. Um, and I was fighting it. And it was actually the Jewish Studies department and centers that effectively marginalized me and ousted me.
That you bring up several important points and interesting points that I think I want to touch upon a little bit, or ask you a little bit more about. So as we're seeing this explosion of anti-Jewish bigotry being normalized in K through 12 schools, we've more people have been aware of it in higher education and college campuses at the university level. We're seeing an equally concerning surge of the normalization of anti-Jewish bigotry in the K-12 space. What do you find that American Jews are getting right and wrong when they're trying to counter this? And one specific thing you brought up that makes this an interesting question for you to answer, is the idea that Jewish studies academics are the ones that had a problem with you identifying as a Zionist. And if that's the case, where like the leadership class of the American Jewish organizational world or academia are the ones taking a position that maybe allows a little bit of anti-Zionism, or tries to kind of minimize how anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. What do you think we're getting right and getting wrong when we're faced with this and trying to address it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I continue to say this over and over. I think that one of the biggest things that we're getting wrong is Jewish identity. I think that we believe that anti-Zionism is a political conversation. It's not. It's at its core, it's a conversation about who we are as Jews. So again, going back to my own experience, both in undergrad and grad, when I was labeling myself a Zionist, naively, I was labeling myself a Jew. But to the American Jews, I was labeling myself a right-wing politician, right? Because for them, the word Zionist was belonged within political discourse. I had no idea I was embarking on a political conversation. In my mind, I was talking about Jewish identity, the Jewish people, and the fact that Jews are first and foremost a people. We're an ethno religion. that really goes to the core of the other problem is that American Jewry, and when I say American Jewry, I want to be careful. I don't want to paint all American Jews,
Right.
but American Jews, a, a large enough segment of American Jews believe that to be Judaism, Jewish identity is a religion, right? They think, and by the way, I teach students right now in high school, and I told my students something controversial. I said, you don't have to believe in God. You're still a Jew if you don't believe in God. And they went, oh, my God, it's a travesty. How could, and I said, well, because to be a Jew is it says Am Yisrael, which is the people of Israel, not Dati Israel, not the faith of Israel, right? It's not the real. It's we are a people. That is a big thing that I think American Jewry missed, because anti-Zionism at its core is an attack on the national origin of the Jewish people, not the religious origin of the Jewish people. And so if you treat Zionism as political discourse, you're going to miss that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And so while I'm walking around proudly saying I'm a Zionist, my interlocutors, the people in academia, are hearing, oh, she's a right-wing politician. But that's not what I was saying. And it has nothing to do with politics. And so in our fight, that is now very much, as you said, in K through 12, it is no longer just in the universities. One of the things it is incumbent upon us to do is to tell the world who are the Jewish people. What does Zion have to do with Jewish identity? What does the land of Israel have to do with Jewish identity? Um, just like, it's funny, we use the word pro-Israel a lot of times within the nonprofit world. And I have a problem with that word, because would you ever say I'm pro-Shabbat? You wouldn't say pro-Shabbat because it's part of Jewish identity. Whether you practice Shabbat or not, Shabbat is part of being a Jew, right? The same thing with pro-Israel. I mean, the words that we're using also are very, it's a huge responsibility, the language that we use. When we say, for instance, that we're Zionists, we have to understand that we're saying that we're Jews and that we have a claim, an ancestral, historical, sovereign, religious, whatever, but we have this part of our identity. So to go back to your question, what is it that we have missed? Two things. One, we have made anti-Zionism a political conversation, and it's not. And two, we've been treating Jewish identity as a religion solely. And in that way have missed that anti-Zionism at its core is a hatred of Jew based on his or her national origin.
I appreciate that and also agree. I mean, one of the things we've talked about a lot is this kind of missed opportunity to explain who are the Jews as a people. And I don't know if that gets missed so much because just in an American context, we don't talk about like tribal origins or heritage in that way. So maybe that's part of it. And then I think that there's also been a pretty well concerted effort by people who want to make anti-Zionism acceptable to really try to tear apart the idea of Jewish peoplehood and erase it. Um, and so I agree with you. Like Zionism isn't political, but my next question is going to be because this time right now we have an incoming administration, the Trump administration, who have expressed pretty clearly and loudly and repeatedly the desire to dismantle the federal Department of Education. Part of the reason being a lot of what we're seeing come out of schools and what we're talking about specifically is Jew hatred and anti-Semitism that we're seeing come out of the K through 12 school system, even though that's not the only problem that a lot of folks have with the U.S. Federal Department of Education. Um, there are some of us who think that'll be a mistake, dismantling it. Not that we necessarily think the status quo is tenable, but I want to know what you think. Do you think that is the kind of a solution to addressing at least let's stick with the problem of anti-Semitism in K through 12 education?
Um, I think that I'm on the fence. I'll be honest with you. I see the pros and cons. I, I think that the DOE is completely corrupt. I think that they have been hijacked by terrible, bad faith actors. I'm waiting for when the Trump administration comes in to do a kind of a forensic autopsy of all the um, as I say, these institutions that have become corrupted by I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, by neo-Marxists. Okay. Um, at the same time, you know, what does that mean though? If you're going to go do away with the federal Department of Education, are you going to then give it to the state? And that becomes another problem, because then we're at square one, because the problems are the states right now: California, New York, Washington D.C. Like these Seattle, where Washington is, right? These are the problem states. So you're not going to fix that problem by doing away with the federal DOE. Um, so I am on the fence with that, but I absolutely think that there has to be a change. I want to see a decentralization of education. I do want education to be as decentralized as possible. Meaning, I think that it should be up to districts. I think it should be up to, I think parents need to have a big say. Um, and, you know, like even in the state of California, the Board of Education, they're completely also, they're ideologues. So we need to put people in place who are not ideologues. But I don't know if that's possible. So I don't have a definitive answer. I'm hopeful, personally, because I think that Trump and his administration, at least at the way that way he's spoken, is taking anti-Semitism seriously, and taking the anti-Semitism on college campuses seriously.
No, I agree. I worry about the districts that are LAUSD, for example, that maybe they have such a powerful teachers union and activist community organizations that are really implementing a lot of bad policies, and they're pretty operate pretty much without any counter. And so I don't know, I worry about decentralizing too much, that we're just going to say, okay, all the kids in LAUSD are at the whim of these activist organizations and community members who want to institutionalize anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism on one hand. And on the other hand, Parents Defending Ed just released that report that showed the $1 billion that the US Department of Education gave out for DEI stuff that, I mean, really did nothing to help improve academic outcomes for students.
Yeah, but I also want to give the power to the parents, right? You can have a cartel, teachers union. You could have a very powerful as a district, but the parent has a right to and should have the ability to walk away to something else. So, and that's, I think, the beauty of also free market. I want there to be more. I would like there to be more schools. I would like there to be more competition. I would like more schools to open up
Mhm.
and offer parents alternatives, right? So just because there are these strong unions and teachers feel beholden to them, I don't think parents should feel beholden to them.
Very good point.
We're at such an interesting pivotal moment as the new administration is coming in, and all this research is coming out showing the ineffectiveness of DEI. So I wonder if, as the federal Department of Education is dismantled, maybe it will be reinvented in a new way while also giving some more power to the states and the parents, but not completely doing away with something at the federal level that could show up in an entirely different way.
Absolutely. Right. I since you brought up DEI, I just want to kind of pause and like talk about that for just a moment. Many of us have been ringing the alarm bells about the dangers of DEI. Um, DEI at its core is, why is it dangerous? It is dangerous because these are code words: diversity, equity, and inclusion are code words that mean the opposite. Actually, they don't mean inclusion. They mean only inclusion of the oppressed. Diversity doesn't really mean diversity. It means only inclusion of a certain oppressed people. That we will only provide diversity to those who have been historically oppressed. And so, you know, I teach a class on propaganda and literature, and I just this week was teaching. We were kind of discussing with my students current events, and we're discussing Syria and the toppling of the Assad regime with the coming of Al Jani. And one student said to me, "Oh, but Dr. Lecht, he said he made a," she opens her computer and she says, "But he made a statement that now that, Syria will be for everyone." And I said, when people speak in those kinds of ways, Syria is for everyone, inclusion for all, diversity for all, it is very frightening. Those kinds of code words, they actually mean the opposite. So we in the Jewish community, many of us have been saying that DEI, it's not just that it's bad for Jews, it's bad for America, it's bad for everyone, it's not healthy. And so, which brings me to another conversation that I don't know if you guys want to have, but it's really important, which is that we are fighting anti-Semitism, but we should be really fighting the root cause of that. Anti-Semitism is a symptom. So DEI is part of that root cause, right? What was the brilliance and ingenuity of the civil rights movement in the 1960s? Was that it was universal. It was about equality for all. And when I hear Jewish activists talk about we need a Jewish civil rights movement, we need to accountability for anti-Semitism. That's so short-sighted. You need to think bigger, because this isn't about anti-Semitism per se. Anti-Semitism is that alarm, I always say, that goes off that something else is really, really a problem. So DEI, for a long time, anti-Semitism was going off to tell us that DEI, there's something, a problem with DEI. Well, what's really inherently problematic with DEI is that DEI ushers in an ideology that is an anathema to America. America is about equality of opportunity. America is about fairness to all. America is about meritocracy. That's what I would love to see. And I'm very hopeful that in this new administration there will be a total, again a forensic, as I say, autopsy, and to reveal it to the world how dangerous these things are.
Yeah, I mean, I see all the same problems. Broadly speaking, I think of anti-Semitism as a symptom of the deeper problem,
Yeah.
the canary in the coal mine historically. So we're talking both about the incoming administration and also trying to get people on board with seeing that anti-Semitism is sort of marching along with anti-Americanism.
Yeah.
But let's just go back to the administration for a second, because in addition to talking about dismantling the Federal Department of Education, they have also promised to take more seriously and to investigate foreign funding into these universities, to bring the lawsuits, to deal with violation of Jewish civil rights, to investigate the funding, and to maybe remove federal funding, accreditation for the schools that are in violation, which is a lot, and it's gonna be really difficult to navigate. Like, how do you think that all of that can be done successfully, given all the nuances that we have to deal with, um, of course, freedom of speech, and where does speech end and incitement to violence or even violence itself begin? So how should we move forward with all that, do you think?
um, Again, I just want to take a step back and say that with universities, you kind of have like state universities versus private universities. Those are two kind of like two different, I guess, strategies should be applied in these cases. Um, State universities in many ways are easier to deal with. You can again revoke the accreditation, or you can impose much more many more rules. With private universities, I think that they can kind of create their own bylaws, and so it's a little bit more difficult to do with that. Look, I think Trump likes to talk big, and like when he says we're going to like I'm going to take away the accreditation. Like, I don't know, I don't even know how you would go about doing that. But I actually, I know that you want to talk about the administration, but I keep on wanting to go back to putting the power back to the people, which is that don't look for. Lately. I've been thinking, don't look for the president. Don't look for one person to be the panacea. Don't look for an organization to save you from the anti-Semitism. Um, a lot of my students are celebrating that they're getting into Ivy Leagues, okay, Jewish kids. I'm conflicted, but I'm thinking to myself, how are Jewish kids harassed on campuses? And they're waiting for either the DOE, okay, not the DOE, then the Trump administration, somebody's going to come and save them. But what if they're not? What if they're not? How much longer are we going to be sending our children to these institutions? Like, what power do we have? Why do we have to rely on Trump, or why do we have to solely? No, I'm not saying not, but my students always ask me, "Oh, Dr. Lecht, are you now happy that Trump is in office and anti-Semitism will go away?" I said, "No, nobody. He's not a hero. He can't. Anti-Semitism is not going to go away, and we have to also take responsibility. What is our part in all this?" Um, I keep on wanting to go back to us. What can we do, and not only rely on the administration to have our back? Am I happy? But at the same, again, I'm so conflicted, because at the same time, I'm so pleased that we have a president who understands that this isn't just a problem for Jews. He understands that this is jihad coming to the West. He understands, or at least his administrations, those who surround him, right? They have at least articulated that this anti-Semitism, um, the calling for, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, for calling for burning Israeli flags at the same time with American flags, is unacceptable. And so I am happy that we have an incoming administration that will take this seriously. But I can't, and I don't know how he's going to go about taking away accreditation. And I think, again, it's a different conversation. We're talking about private universities versus public universities. But what I want to stress to you, to the viewers and listeners, is we also have the power. I am a mother. I have a son. Do I want my son going to an Ivy League school right now? Actually, no. I wouldn't be sending him there.
You bring up and something that I discussed. I was in Michigan earlier this year and speaking to a group of Jewish parents, community members, grandparents, and that was the question. Well, should we kind of seed ground and tell our kids, well, no, you can't do this because it's so bad, or should we stick there and kind of fight it out? And I mean, I'm of two thoughts with that. I think one, I'm not going to pay for somebody to abuse my children, and if you take the brightest minds, these Jewish students, they're, entering colleges and universities, and the brightest minds of the Jewish academics that have been, some of them, you being one of them, have been forced out or left academia because of the incredible amount of Jew hatred there. You're going to build a new quote unquote Ivy. Like that, those other institutions will become elite centers of learning because you've taken the best and brightest minds and they've attended those. So I think that there's a lot of maybe some hesitation, or maybe just not realizing that we have that power to build and create our own without being subjected to being spat upon and threatened and mezuzah torn off of door frames and the like.
Yeah.
I'm kind of the mindset that different kids might want to do different things. It's not right for all kids to be in that environment. Starting new organizations and schools is wonderful, and that's actually already happening. And we all know of some of those, and we also know some really strong, smart, courageous kids who are going into these sort of hotbeds of anti-Semitism. And maybe that's one way to shift things, because if we absent ourselves from those spaces, then obviously it's not going to get better. It's just going to get worse, more of an echo chamber. And going back to what you said before about DEI not really fostering inclusivity, it certainly does not foster viewpoint diversity. I mean, it talks about different identities, and some are included and some are, disposed of, basically. But also with respect to having constructive dialogue and hearing from Zionists who understand that that's an ethno-religious identity, not a political statement, is, I think vital. And I'd love to hear more of what you think about empowering the parents. So if we're not going to rely on federal funding being removed, which may or may not happen, I don't see that as totally disconnected from empowering the parents, because if the parents know what to do when their children are, being punched in the face, or the Chabad house is attacked and there's swastikas, like all these different kinds of things happen, different issues in the curriculum itself. What what should parents do so that we get out from behind the eight ball?
I speak to parents from time to time, and I am myself a parent. But I'll share with you, um, my son, when we lived in California, was at a public school, and something came into the curriculum, not anti-Semitic, but anti-American, and I really, really, really had a problem with it. And I, of course, went immediately. I think parents should go and speak. First of all, they shouldn't be scared. But I went to the principal, who sent me to the superintendent of the district, and effectively, I got nowhere. I have to be honest with you. I did. I got nowhere. So it was very disheartening, and just it felt like I didn't know what I could do. And I'm not a litigious person. I didn't want to go with like lawsuits. Um, so what can parents do? I think that parents, it's a two-pronged process. The first part of that process is, do you even know what to look for? Like, that's the thing. Like, do parents even know what's happening? It's not just the anti-Semitism. Like, would your antennas, as I like to say, go off if your child came home, like my child, and said, "We learned about equity in school." And I said, "Oh, what did you learn about equity?" "Oh, Mrs. So and so said that sometimes you have to be unfair to some in order to be fair to others." And my alarms went off, my antennas went off. It had nothing to do with anti Semitism, right? But I went marching to the school. Now, what did I find out in my conversation with the principal is that they are actually, what they mean is equality of opportunity. They don't even know what the word equity means themselves. They're using that term, equitable outcome, equitable classrooms, equitable education. They are actually, what they mean is equality of opportunity. So the first phase with parents is to educate parents to know what to look for, right? Do they even know what to look for? It doesn't always have to look like anti-Semitism. But the second thing is, how much power do the parents really have? I don't know. I'm of the belief that it's, if you can't affect the change at your district school, you walk out. And guess what? That's the beauty of free markets. That's the beauty of capitalism. You lose business and you start thinking, I want the business back. What do I do to get the business back? We have that power. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
as much as I love Harvard, would love my son to go there. If my son is young now, but if he could, he would not be going to these schools. I am of the mindset I am not going to pay for my child to get abused.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
I hear you, Marcy, as well, because to walk out of those spaces is to give up and to negate our existence. And I don't like that either.
with school, I look at it like you're paying for something, and if that institution isn't providing that something, like abuse aside, then why would you pay for it? So if they're not providing actual like learning and scholarship, I'm not going to pay for that. So one final question before we wrap up this time, but I know
Okay.
Naya, we're gonna be asking you to come back. Um, so yes, parents have a lot of power, and I think that that is a huge untapped resource. Jewish American parents, all American parents have a lot more power than maybe we're exercising, but we're also seeing that they're unaware or too afraid to use it. And I think
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons why we saw so many folks surprised by the reaction to the October 7th Hamas led terror attack, where people, teachers, students were celebrating the kidnapping and
Yeah.
massacre and raping of Israelis. Those of us who paid attention, whose antenna would go up with the other stuff, weren't quite surprised because I was shocked, maybe disappointed, disgusted, but not surprised because it was kind of always leading to that.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if part of that is just the kind of missed opportunity, maybe the miscalculation in the American Jewish community to the level of anti-Semitism
Mhm.
overall in society, to the level it's been institutionalized, to the level it's become an acceptable belief to just hate Jews.
Gosh, I'm trying to temper myself because I have so much that I want to say about that. I I'm going to answer you by asking a question, not of both of you, but something that I often do, which is, where are Jews from? I ask this question, and I have to tell you that October 7th has made it easier for American Jews to say, oh, Jews come from Israel. Now, that's an essential question. Where are the Jewish people from? Um, I've met many people who have told me that prior to October 7th, they would not know the answer, where are Jewish people from? They thought Jews come from everywhere. Now, why am I saying this? Because October 7th revealed what was already there, as I said in my introductory remarks. But what it showed me, at least, is that for many of my colleagues, friends, peers, they didn't understand that anti-Zionism, it's not a political, speech act, right? Calling Israel an occupier, a settler colonizer, is not a political disagreement. It is a negation, an attack, an assault on Jewish identity, a core aspect of Jewish identity. Jewish identity is a triangle: the land, the people, and the God. You deny one of those, you deny a third of what makes a Jew a Jew. And so I think with I also, like you, Brandy, I wasn't surprised about that there was such a surge of anti-Semitism, that it became permissible. But what did shock me is that people were surprised. But what that showed me, revealed to me, is that we have so much to do, so much work within our own Jewish world of teaching our children and ourselves that question: where are Jewish people from? If you can answer that question, you will understand that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Regarding the other part of your question, which is kind of downplaying anti-Semitism or saying, well, it's okay. I think the American Jews, and I love them, they're my people, but I think by and large, American Jews have had a vacation from history. And October 7th is brought them back in many ways. And, it it almost, it's like a double-edged sword. Do we want anti-Semitism? No. But what does anti-Semitism produce?
Mm-hmm.
Strong Jews.
Yeah, it's a silver lining.
It's the silver lining. So I keep on seeing these amazing posts like, call me a Zionist. I couldn't be more prouder. People write that. Or tell me how much you hate the Jews, and I'm going to be even more Jewish. I see those kinds of posts and I kind of smile inside, because that's kind of what anti-Semitism does.
Mm-hmm. So to end on a positive note, there is something that's in our control, right? Which is to educate our people. Jews are from Judea, and that's a phrase that should be rolling off everybody's tongue. And that is a way that parents can empower themselves and our kids by going back to actual education and teaching Jewish history and those three prongs that you just mentioned, and so much else, so that we are not empty vessels into which this disinformation will be poured, especially when kids get to college. They're going to possibly align themselves with the fashionable anti-Zionist agenda. But there's something we can do about that.
I love that. I love the whole MTV. I love that image. It's very good. No, I would be using that's great. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, yeah, I mean, again, who did this? It was my mother. My mother told me when I was little, Naya, we speak Russian. You were born in Ukraine, but we're Jews. We come from the land of Judea. She told me that when I was, I think like 9 years old, 10. And I just will never forget it. It's so empowering.
That's amazing. I never got that. I grew up in the bubble, the 1970s, a little bit, 80s, 90s. Didn't get any of that. I don't think it was taught in Hebrew school. And I was like an involved person. I'm an educated person. I'm more educated than most people to being a world religions professor. And there's so much that I didn't know until the past, 5 or 10 years. And I think there's so much that people could and should and must know.
Yeah.
I think even Jewish day schools have been a little bit soft on this. I've heard from a couple of day school leaders who have traditionally sort of shied away from some of this education so as not to be divisive among our people. However, post October 7th, with this conversion that people are having, we're realizing that some things are more foundational than others, and information and knowledge is going to have to be brought forward much more in order to halt this. And again,
Mm.
I kind of realized this as you were speaking, actually. This is actually very good news because there's so much that we cannot control and we can push back on things, but this we can own and we can be the instigators and the creators of more knowledge and education.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And thankfully, we're here to do just that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Naya. Thank you so much
Thanks.
for coming on with us. Oh, and I want to give you a chance, please, to mention your podcast. Because speaking of knowledge and teaching ourselves and our children,
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Shameless plug. So I started a show. It's called Don't Know Much About. You could find it on Spotify and Apple Play, as well as YouTube. And its no episode is no longer than 20 minutes. And I take a hot topic having to do with the history of the Jewish people and the Arab-Israeli conflict. My latest episode was on whether the quote unquote settlements are legal or illegal. On Gaza, I've done one on the Nakba. So please go find me on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Don't know much about.
It's wonderful. I love listening to you there.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you again. See you next time. Thank you for watching. If you would like to support our work, subscribe to YouTube and follow us on our socials. The links are in the description.